Revenge is one of the oldest engines in storytelling. Long before cinema, it drove myths, stage plays, and literature, from the blood-soaked cycles of Greek tragedy to the meticulous retribution of the Count of Monte Cristo. At its core, Revenge asks a simple question: what happens when justice fails and someone decides to take it for themselves? Cinema didn't just inherit that question, it fractured it into something cathartic, something corrosive, and often something deeply unsettling. Early revenge films were structured, controlled, almost intellectual. Films like Kind Hearts and Coronets, or early adaptations of The Count of Monte Cristo, framed revenge as precise, elegant, and humorous. But over time, that clarity began to rot. By the late 1960s and 70s, revenge stories grew colder, harsher, more disillusioned. Neo-noir films like Point Blank and Get Carter stripped away glamour, and in the Western, Once Upon a Time in the West turned revenge into something mythic, but emotionally compelling. Then exploitation cinema exploded with raw, confrontational narratives. Films like I Spit on Your Grave and Lady Snowblood pushed revenge into extreme, often controversial territory, and globally cinema became even more brutal. From Japanese crime dramas to Korean masterpieces like Oldboy, revenge evolved into something cyclical, obsessive, inescapable. Here are 6 of the best revenge films out there. I really wanted to include Coralie Fargeet's Revenge from 2017, as it's a perfect mix of exploitation, action and art house cinema, but alas, it does not make the list. Here are the 6 that did. Dead Man's Shoes. Dead Man's Shoes is revenge stripped down to its most intimate form. What begins as a brother's mission quickly unravels into something far more disturbing. Because this isn't really about vengeance, it's about grief and guilt. While Richard is torturing his targets, he is attempting to overcome both guilt and grief. By the end, the film asks a brutal question: what if the person you're trying to punish most is yourself? Get Carter. Get Carter is cold, methodical, unforgiving. There's no heroism here, just the theme that violence begets violence until all are dead. The plot is lean and muscular while the visuals are stripped of glamour like a Newcastle neo-noir. Michael Caine is at his razor-sharp best as the marauding gangster hunting his brother's killers as ultimately Northern decay meets moral collapse. Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair. As revenge epics and Asian cinema homages go, Kill Bill, The Whole Bloody Affair from 2025 is a staggering piece of synthesis from Quentin Tarantino. It fuses global influences including anime, samurai cinema and grindhouse exploitation films, all into something heightened and unmistakably his own. A world of colour, blood, incredible choreography, fantastic fights and cutting precision. Violence here isn't merely destructive, it becomes balletic. It becomes a form of expression, even purification, elevating Beatrice's journey from victim to legend. Mermaid Legend. Mermaid Legend is elevated by Mari Shirato's ethereal magnetic performance as Migiwa, a wife who becomes avenging angel and elemental force. Her transformation drives the film into increasingly confrontational territory where extreme violence and explicit sexuality feel less gratuitous than weaponized, forcing the viewer into a state of unease. Lyrical underwater imagery and sacred mournful music render the violence into something ritualistic, culminating in a final peer rampage that feels less like action than actual ceremony. Oldboy. Oldboy is a film I can watch over and over and it still shocks me. The narrative feels like a perverse inversion of The Count of Monte Cristo, but where Dumas offers revenge as a calculated, almost righteous act, Park Chan-wook and the source material is based on presents it as something recursive and inescapable. The brilliance of Oldboy lies in its dual revenge structure. What begins as Oh Dae-soo's pursuit of answers gradually reveals itself to be the final movement in someone else's long orchestrated vengeance. The film's infamous twists don't just shock, they reframe the entire narrative as a closed system of suffering, where revenge ceases to be cathartic and instead becomes a mechanism of chaos. Once Upon a Time in the West. Charles Bronson's harmonica is not a conventional protagonist, but a force moving through the landscape with quiet, relentless purpose. He speaks little, explains nothing, and yet every gesture feels loaded with intent. His pursuit of Henry Fonda's Frank, a brutal mercenary introduced through shocking child-murdering violence, is not driven by impulse but by deep memory. Ennio Morricone's mournful score turns each encounter into ritual, with Leone's classic close-up, suspenseful and patient build-up suddenly bursting into shots blazing. When harmonica finally unleashes havoc, it is not simply chaotic, but precise, measured and almost ceremonial. Conclusion. To distill revenge cinema into 6 films is inevitably an incomplete task. It is too vast, too varied, and spanning everything from important works to obscure, difficult films that remain unseen or underexplored. And yet, that is precisely why revenge endures. It is a universal impulse, endlessly adaptable to tone, culture and form. Whether stylized, brutal, philosophical, or deeply personal, revenge remains one of cinema's most powerful motivations for characters and filmmakers alike.